Jim, why don't you welcome everybody?
Thanks, Patricia. Welcome to Fripp's VT's User Group webinar for APA Congress speakers. I'm Jim Medlock, APA's Director of Education and Training. Joining me today with Patricia are Sally Thompson, one of APA's Director of Payroll Training, and the incomparable Patricia Fripp. Patricia is APA's resident speech coach, a presenter at more than 20 APA Congresses, and the leader and coordinator of the Congress Speaker School on May the 4th. Now don't forget, if you're planning to attend the May 4th Congress Speaker School, be sure to RSVP to Teresa Lopez or Angela Benavides in the APA Speaker Administration Department. So Patricia, let's begin giving our speakers some tips on their last-minute preparations for the Congress. It's just 4 short weeks away.
Well, welcome everybody, and this event is designed to help you relax and truly enjoy your presentation the way we want you to. If you haven't signed up or don't intend signing up for the speaker school, you better have a damn good reason, because it's always fun. And this year we're bringing a special guest, one of my friends, Craig Valentine, who was the 2000 International World Champion of Public Speaking. Anyway, on this call, we have a 4th person who helps run a successful experience, and this is Paul. He will be in charge of running our polls and answering your questions. So, Paul, tell everyone how they can interact with us.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a chat box. In this chat box, you'll be able to ask your short, specific questions that will be answered during the call. Also, we'll be running polling questions throughout the call. They'll appear in the same area as the chat box. Once you select your answer, click Vote, and then click back on the Chat tab to return to the chat.
And why don't we start with the first question? This is very easy. Have you presented at Congress before? And you can answer yes or no. You'll have a minute to do that. And while you're just learning how to do this, let's get started with delivering content. Now, at this point, I'm not sure how far along you are with your presentation. You've probably already submitted your handout, which means you've designed the PowerPoint. However, when it comes to having an engaging experience for your associates, really what you need to do is rehearse. Rehearsal is the work, performance is the relaxation. And in a perfect world, you will get your PowerPoint ready and you'll invite some of your friends or colleagues into your office or your living room and you'll practice with real people. Once you have got comfortable interacting with the slides and seeing where the audience response comes, then start thinking about how can you create a great experience before people are actually in the room. I suggest you go very early and be set up and prepared, which isn't always easy when you're changing rooms really fast and you might have 15 minutes to set up. As much as possible, interact with the audience and talk to them before you officially start. Now, I know Jim and Sally have prepared some questions on your behalf, so let's see what the polls say, and then we'll take it in turns for you to shoot everybody's questions. Paul, what is the answer?
85% said yes, they have presented before, and 15% said no, they haven't.
Well, congratulations, all of you. And for the 85% of you have, let's make a goal to make this even better than usual. All right, Jim, first question.
Patricia, I have trouble getting the audience's attention at the beginning of my workshops. They're talking, they're using their smartphones, they're coming in late. What do you suggest I do to get their attention so that I'm the focal point of the presentation?
Well, perhaps you want to stand on stage and in a nice powerful voice, say, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your silence. And you repeat that a couple of times, and it is amazing what will happen. That's technique 1. Technique 2, you might put some loud music before you come up. You can also, a couple of minutes ahead of time, said nice and loud into your microphone, ladies and gentlemen, get settled, get organized. You have 2 minutes before we officially start. What I have in my PowerPoint already built in is a welcome. And I know years ago we made one of these for APA, but I put a welcome with music, and then it automatically goes in to turn off your cell phone or mute them, and then bring up your opening slide. Now, of course, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, Jim, because that means you need sound to be able to do that. Although you can always carry your own very small speakers. You just need to get their attention. And then remember, the first 30 seconds of your presentation have to be impactful. And I do not suggest they are. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What I am going to talk about is have something more exciting and compelling. Sally.
Patricia, I've been practicing my presentation, and I find that I'm finishing in 60 minutes. How can I stretch it out to 90 minutes?
Don't worry, 60 minutes is probably perfect, because you would not have been invited to speak at Congress if you didn't have a life experience that could probably fill 4 days of content. You have 90 minutes. And remember, this is not about you knowing the subject as much as helping your audience understand the subject. So what I suggest you do after each chunk of content, say, what are your specific questions? Or how do you see this applies? Or is this change going to affect you considerably? Start a little dialogue. You do that, and we always build question and answers as part of the presentation. You can do it during your presentation as well as at the end. And if your subject is somewhat complex, I suggest you do it. Now, I usually deliver what might be considered softer subjects. Presentation skills, advanced presentation skills. And so I break mine up by getting people not only to ask me questions, but come on stage and deliver the opening of the presentation and do mini coaching. What we have to remember, and perhaps you've heard this in speaker school, the enemy of the speaker is sameness. Because our audiences have days of attending sessions. It's very easy for them to get distracted or check their email on their phone. So what we want them to do is keep adding levels of variety, and engaging the audience is certainly one way to do that. So good news, you have plenty of time for interaction. You'll still think you're running out of time. Jim?
Patricia, you tell the speakers that their last word should linger. You say never end with a Q&A and never end with a thank you. Can you explain that? Now, I know we may have caused some problems with our PowerPoint template because it ends with a Q&A. And I've always thanked my audience as well. How can I improve that?
Well, it's just a matter of defining exactly what we all mean. Because certainly you want to thank the audience. I suggest you do it at the end, not the beginning, because you could say thank you for selecting this session. And I usually say towards the end, thank you for selecting powerful, persuasive presentation skills, or whatever the subject is. And I get them to fill out their evaluation before the very end, because you're more likely to get them to do that. And of course, as you know, Jim, I ask, perhaps you want to make comments like, bring her back, pay her double. What you want to do in your concluding remarks, so don't consider you'll end 1 minute before it's actually over. Start considering about 8 minutes before the end. So let's just say you do your review and handle the questions, and be very clear how long you have with the questions. And as Paul said, what are your short, specific questions? Now, with a complex subject, you might have done during, so ask your questions, and then I would suggest you get them to fill in their questionnaire, and I will say APA really cares what you think. How are you going to do? What was the best idea? How was this pertinent? And promise them that the bonus technique or one of the best ideas is going to be after they filled in the evaluation. Otherwise, they're too likely to run out. Then what you can do is say, thank you for selecting this session. We hope it's been valuable, and remember. And what you're going to do with your remember is reinforce one of your key ideas. So Sally, you have a session we were discussing. Let's give an example from your presentation.
I'm doing a presentation on wages owed to deceased employees.
Good. So what you might do after your Q&A, the fill in the evaluation, the thank you for selecting this area, say, remember, when it comes to payment of deceased employees, the number one what? Issue, place to go?
Right. One important thing, no, I don't use the word thing.
No.
One important key piece to remember is to have someone complete a Form W-9, whether it be the beneficiary, the trustee, the executor, the family member. According to state laws, who's ever to receive that payment, have them complete a Form W-9.
Good. Do that and your life will be easier. Your next session will start in 20 minutes, or what you might also like to see you this afternoon for part 2 of, or another session. So can you see, Jim, what Sally just showed us is you reinforce what you really need them to remember. And if you add, and then your life will be easier, there's more chance they'll do it. You have a question for me, Sally?
I do, Patricia. I've submitted my presentation, my handouts, not my slides, but I'm concerned that I have far more information in my handout than I have time to discuss.
Well,
I'm going to need to leave out entire subjects. Is that okay? And how do I adjust my audience's expectations?
I'm going to answer that question, then I'm going to push it off to Jim Medlock for the official answer. What I would say is certainly as you bring attention to the fact that in your handout there's more information than you cover, I'll say, as you know, this subject is a lot more complex than we could handle in 90 minutes. So these segments are added for your reference and follow-up. Jim, what would you say?
That's exactly what I'm going to be saying, Patricia. I have a session on the 1099 miscellaneous form where I provide them reference material, and I cover it briefly, and I say, you can follow up, you can research, you can study from the material in the handout, but I won't be able in our 90 minutes together to be able to get into that much detail.
Okay, good. So the secret is you acknowledge it. And part of our role as a speaker is to get people excited enough, show them the value to them in our subject that they want to learn more. And you could also encourage them to share this information with people in their team who are not at Congress. And you might want to say, if this is a subject that perhaps you want to discuss as a program at your APA chapter, if it's that complex. Because if I may suggest, what we're also doing while we are presenting on behalf of APA is we are really advocates for every aspect of what APA offers. And all the leaders, when they're on stage, always tell us to get involved. And this is part of the role of the Congress presenters, is to reinforce getting involved and staying involved and making a contribution. One of the best ways for us to reinforce what we've learned is to teach other people. So especially with these more complex issues, it's good to encourage them to go and have their own team meetings at home or with their chapter and teach what they think they learned. All right, you have another question for me, Jim?
I sure do, Patricia. Emily Rook and I are presenting a session on payroll forms. And of course, the IRS continues to release new ones. So we've had to develop some new material put together since we submitted our handout. Now, I've got comments in the past on my evaluations that my handouts didn't agree to my PowerPoint. Do you have any suggestions on how I should address this in my presentation?
Well, it's very much like having more content. And just up front, one of the complexities of your job is the ongoing changes from the IRS. One of the challenges for a presenter is we have to get our handouts early. So please don't rate on my evaluation poorly because of this. Blame the IRS, not me.
Thanks a lot, Patricia. That's a great suggestion, and I definitely will use it. It's always good to blame it on the IRS.
Definitely. And the point is, all we have to do is answer, and this is a key technique, answer the unasked questions that the audience has. Now, some of them will ask their questions. However, something like this, they're probably much, oh, look, this is different. So up front, get it out the way, and then it's less of an issue. Sally.
Well, speaking of questions, Patricia, what is the best way to address questions without losing your audience at the end of the class? A lot of times the participants will get up and start to leave as several people are asking questions towards the end of the session.
Well, obviously, I can't control all the audiences. And people are going to do what they want to do, especially if they're hungry or want to go to the bathroom before their next session. And it is Las Vegas. I do not know how much your APA members gamble. All I can say is, in the last 8 minutes for your questions, let's make them short, specific to the topic, and relevant for all of us. If you have any personal question that only relates to your situation, I'm happy to meet you outside the door at the end of the session.
Very good, thank you.
I have nothing more brilliant than that. You could lock the door and tell them no one can leave. You can have some big burly person who is your co-presenter and his only role is to make sure nobody leaves. Or you can give them a prize for staying till the end. Now, I don't know what it is, but it could be a prize in the way of specific advice, or in my closing remarks, you will hear which booth is giving food for free at the trade show. It could be as simple as that. All right, Paul, let's have another poll. So let's see, what is the most difficult part of your Congress presentation? Why don't you bring that up and tell us what their choices are?
The choices are the opening, closing, coordinating the presentation to the PowerPoint, and answering questions.
All right, good. So let's see what our listeners say. What I usually find in speaker school, that we have questions about how do you present with somebody else. Jim, do you know how many of the sessions at Congress are 2 or 3 presenters?
Patricia, I would guess it's at least 50%. I know in the sessions that I'm involved with, I think I've only got 2 that I am presenting by myself. I'm either moderating panels or I am co-presenting with others. And actually, I find those more enjoyable, to be able to bounce back and forth, to share with each other. And I think it helps keep the audience engaged because they don't know where anything's going to come from at any point in time.
Well, I would agree with you, and that's why we chose to have 4 of us with different roles in this web event, because the enemy of the speaker is sameness, and that's very good. What I do recommend is, even if it's on the phone, you have some sort of rehearsal with your co-presenters. And what I recommend you decide. Now, are we going to have 2 or 3 different chunks of content and then Q&A for all of us at the end? Or are we going to have sort of one topic and we all give 2 or 3 different points of view? It's all a matter of, just as you would structure your presentation, you structure it with 3 presenters, and everybody knows the format. So even though it doesn't work out exactly what you expect, you hold the overview and you set the expectations for the audience. Let them know we will all be delivering our segment. Jim is talking about this, Fred is talking about that, Sally will be here to do this. And then you will have your opportunity to pose questions to all of us. So it's setting the expectations. All right, let's just, before I have more comments, Paul, read us your results.
It looks like the biggest difficulty is the closing. 40% of the people said that was their biggest difficulty. Second, 35% was the opening, 15% answering questions, and only 10% is coordinating their presentation to the PowerPoint.
Okay, good. Well, what we're going to do, in the order of preference, as soon as we finish this, you will bring them up for me one at a time. I'll add my remarks, and then Sally and Jim can add theirs. All right, so let's go back to just when you have a co-presenter. What I find a lot of individuals do is they hand off in what I would consider a feeble way. They'll just say, they'll deliver there, and then Fred will tell you about such and such. Within your presentation, you have your opening and you have a clean close. You have your last words linger for that session, Sally, and then one step to the side, and you are now in a different role, which is a presenter, an introducer of the next speaker. And it's good to sell the value of that next speaker. So it could look something like this. So now that you know how to design and deliver your presentation, the next part of this formula is, how do you get APA chapters to know you're available? Let me introduce you to the man who has all the power and influence and all the answers for that question. As you know, Jim Medlock has. So even though people might know you and you might have been introduced, sell the value of the next presenter. And then when Jim finishes, do his concluding remarks, now that you know. So now that you've heard how to do whatever Patricia said, what you did, you're doing the review within the presentation. The next step is to focus on how we. And nobody can handle this better than Sally, because. So if that makes sense. With a panel, Jim, that's another animal. And the person who runs a panel really is like the ringmaster, and they are the glue. And it's the person who moderates a panel's responsibility to make sure that everybody knows what is expected of them, so that you're not all talking about the same point of view on the subject. That would be very boring very fast. And you can you'll introduce all the panelists in advance and then say, discuss such and such. Here's John, here's Mary. So do it, the setup, and tell people again when they can ask questions. And what's going to happen, everyone will deliver a 5-minute presentation on their aspect of the subject, then we'll open up to your questions. So just let people know what to expect, and the speakers on the panel, their responsibilities. Now, talking about panels, I usually find, especially if people only have 3 or 4 minutes to introduce the idea, that they think, I can do 3 or 4 minutes. No, to deliver 3 or 4 or 5 minutes is a lot tougher, because you've got to edit your remarks to a nub. And anytime I've coached panelists with my corporate clients, my clients get all the questions directed to them, because even though it might be 2 or 3 minutes, they script and have a tight presentation. If you have 2 minutes, how many times, Jim, have you had people say, oh, well, I only have 2 minutes, how can I say anything in 2 minutes? And they waffle away the 2 minutes. So if you're on a panel with a short presentation, be prepared. Any more comments on that, Jim and Sally?
Well, let me share you, Patricia, what I've got a couple of panels that I'll be leading at the Congress. We're actually going to be more in an interview format, where I'll be asking them questions about the material. I have one panel that will be last year's PRISM Award recipients, and I've got specific questions that we planned ahead of time. It's in their handout material that they submitted, that I'll be asking questions that relate to that. They'll be talking about their practices, how they decided to submit PRISM Award nominations, and then my last question for each of the panelists is, what happened after you received the PRISM Award? And it works really well. These individuals are not normally speakers at an event like this, so it makes it a little more casual for them, and they're less inclined to go on, and it helps me control the time, so everybody gets their own time.
That is a brilliant technique, and I recommend this a lot to my corporate clients, because very few people, even if they're introverts, are afraid of answering questions. They're terrified of giving speeches. So especially if you put them on a high stool, make them comfortable, or on a sofa setting, it really works very well. And it's almost like I'm a fly on the wall for this fancy group of people. It's very exciting. Good. Sally, what about you? Are you sharing your time with other co-presenters?
Yes, I am. I have 3 presentations, 2 in which I share, and we have worked together in the past. So I think we have a very comfortable working relationship in able to pass the microphone on to one another.
Good, good.
So.
Comfort makes it easier, because when you are relaxed, the audience is more relaxed. So Paul, pick up the 40% of the audience has trouble with.
Well, one quick question from Bill, actually, I apologize. He says that him and his co-speaker will be trading back and forth between 8 different topics. Do you have any specific suggestions for those handoffs?
Is this Bill Dunn? Or
I'm
don't
not sure.
you know? Well, anyway, so there are 8 different subjects in one session. Well, probably what you might want to do, you might want to list them on the PowerPoint. And just so it keeps everyone on track. And probably it's best to be logical, and as they are listed, go down so the audience can look, and if they have a specific question about your third topic, they could prepare it in advance. And if it is that Bill Dunn, he's very smooth on his feet, and he will handle it very well. Are there any more questions?
Yes, from Dennis. He says he prefers to move with a purpose when he presents. However, there's usually only one lapel mic, so when he co-presents, the handoff for the microphone can be rather difficult. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yes, spend big bucks and get two. I mean, is that a problem, Jim? Can we get them two mics?
It really is, Patricia. We're trying to be very economical at the Congress, and so we program the rooms for the entire session all the week, so we don't have to pay for resetting. And when we look at it, we put one lapel mic in each room. So yes, it's a cost issue.
Okay, well, fine. Well, then, Dennis, that's absolutely fine. All you have to do is at the end of your remarks, make sure you're close to your co-presenter. That's what you do. And we maximize the investment in the one microphone.
And Patricia, can I give a hint to Dennis?
Yeah.
I've got a session I do with Mike O'Toole that we go back and forth. And what one of us does is we stand at the lectern where there's a microphone, and the other one uses the lapel mic. So we are able to go back and forth that way without having to hand the microphone back and forth.
So in fact, you do have two microphones. You just have one extra apart from the lectern. So that is two microphones. So if I had had that information, that's what I would have said, Jim. Wonderful. Perfect. Are there any more, or we'll look at the closing?
Well, I think we can take a look at the 40% that said their most difficult thing in presentations is closing. There's no questions other than that.
Okay, good. Well, of course, as you have heard, think of your close as a segment. It's the answer the questions, it's the handle the evaluation, it's giving a walk-away line. And it's not bad if you're delivering other sessions that are in harmony with yours to let them know when it is. And if you were going to add something else just to keep in your back pocket, it might be a philosophy of yours. Or it could be, so for example, is after 23 years in payroll, the best advice to maximize your Congress experience is look at your notes before you leave. Or it could be, if you've given an interesting statistic within your presentation, you can reinforce and remember 93% of this form is the same. Mastering the 7% isn't tough for somebody as smart as you. So it's almost an inspirational, you've been overwhelmed, relax. You can also save one of your best stories or examples, and a story and example can take 2 minutes to tell. You just allow it in the time with your concluding segment of what happens to a payroll manager when they do everything exactly as you have presented in your session. So think of this, the opening and the concluding remarks are often the most powerful. The opening breaks the distraction, gets their attention, and gives the audience the opportunity to think, wow, this is an interesting approach, or this is going to be better than I thought. And then the concluding remark can tie it in a bow. So it's not bad to have something that is a circular technique, an idea or a formula or an emotion at the beginning can close the loop. So think of tying it in the bow. And now, Jim or Sally, do you have anything to add to closings?
I think that's a great suggestion, Patricia. I'm always struggling with my closings because I seem to have individuals who distract me by getting up as I'm getting ready for my closing. They must be running to the next workshop.
Well, what I would suggest you think is don't focus on the 8 that are leaving. Focus on the 123 that's still sitting there. Now Sally, do you have any other comment? And otherwise we'll handle the 35% with their opening.
Practice, practice, practice. You cannot over-prepare.
Yes. And this really ties into the person who's concerned. I have 90 minutes and I only have 60 minutes of content. No. With audience involvement, it will spread out, believe me. So always, you're going to be nervous with your closing. And I know, give me an audience, I love it. And it's very easy to get carried away if they're asking questions. Take a clock. That's the best thing I can get. Take a clock, or if you have an iPad, it can go backwards to tell you how long you have. So start a couple of minutes earlier than you normally would. And then it'll be less likely they're going to run out because you're giving them a couple of minutes. So let's look at the opening. And the opening is one of my favorite parts of any presentation, whether I'm listening to it or delivering it. Your name is on your PowerPoint slide. You don't have to tell them who you are the first thing out of your mouth. I'm not saying you don't acknowledge it. What you might also want to do is an approach I frequently use at APA. And that is, I'll stand up and say, usually, or at breakout sessions, we introduce ourselves. And as I'm used to being introduced, I'm going to pretend I'm somebody else, introduce myself, you will applause profusely, and then I'll start. So we're thrilled to have Patricia Fripp as our speaker on, and I'll introduce myself as if it was someone else. Now, you might say, oh, nobody else is going to do that, but it's a very good technique. Now, there's another technique that I like to use before we officially start. So if people are in the room 5 or 6 minutes ahead of time, I have the microphone on and I start talking to them ahead of time, the warm-up act. And I always like to ask them, is it against your religion or philosophy to rate this session excellent, assuming that it is excellent? And of course, ho, 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 no. Then what do I have to do to earn the right to have excellent? Now, this is on the subject of selling yourself and your ideas. And I ask for a volunteer. And the volunteer, I tell them if there's a flip chart in the room, I can tell them they're going to write on the flip chart. If not, I'm going to say you're going to take a note of what they want. So you get the audience to tell you what their expectations are on the subject. So then I say, well, assuming we do this, do we get an excellent rating? Then, if someone brings up a topic that isn't going to be covered, clear their expectation and say, well, that's more that's more advanced, or this is a different aspect than in this workshop. There'll be another tomorrow afternoon presented by. And this way you're warming up your audience, you're getting them involved. I've always considered this, be your own warm-up act. And this is very subtle. Whether you know it or not, a lot of this is psychological, because we are all programmed from little children with the law of reciprocation. If somebody extends themselves to you, you feel obligated to give them something back. Your mother said, don't forget to thank Mrs. Smith for inviting you to Johnny's birthday party. Don't forget to write your grandmother a thank you note for your Christmas present. So if you extend yourself to them, they are more likely to give you attention at the beginning. You're not going to keep their attention for 90 minutes if it is an engaging presentation. So that's before you actually say, now I would do music, or in a microphone, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, Patricia Fripp. Do something to signal the opening. And then start with a story. It could be a story about a payroll manager who did what you suggested they did successfully. It could be a story of a payroll manager who didn't know about the W-9, Jim, and what a frustration it was. And then to get into your topic and say, to guarantee you're never like Joni, welcome to this. This is what you're going to learn. And then at the end, you could do a story about Joni attended this session, and now, so the end of the story is a happy ever after. Or let's start with an emotion. So for example, take an interesting statistic from your presentation. And it could be, would it interest you to know that? Would it horrify you to know that? Would it surprise you to know that? So Jim, let's put you on the spot. From the W-9, if you started your presentation with, would it surprise you to know? Now, what interesting statistic or part of your presentation would in fact surprise them to know?
I think to take that, Patricia, what I would say is, if you don't receive a W-9 from the family or their executor, you're required to withhold 28% from the payment that you're making. That's why the W-9 is the key.
Perfect. So can you see, you take a segment out of your presentation and push it up front to intrigue them. So would it surprise you to know? Now, Jim, let's horrify them. What happens if they miss something or they don't know something? Would it horrify you to know that if you...
One of my sessions is on non-qualified deferred compensation, and I think an excellent opening for it would be, would it horrify you to know if the non-qualified plan is not handled correctly, the entire value of that plan will be included in your executive's income, and they'll be taxed at least 60% on that amount.
Good. So that's great. Pause there. Take one step forward and say, what's that going to do for your career advancement?
Are you looking for a new job?
So you see how you intrigue them and engage them in a very entertaining way. You reinforce the importance of your subject. So Sally, let's take one of your presentations and do it with you.
Would it horrify you to know if you made that final payment to the deceased employee's spouse and later learned the beneficiary was to a former spouse? you will now have to make an additional payment to that former spouse.
Okay, good, wonderful. And Paul, let's invite people to send their opening line if they were going to use this formula. So if any send in their line, you can bring them up. So good. So you see, you're bringing, the idea is just to engage the audience. Now, let's just take the very simple formula. If I were to ask you, so for example, in one of my presentations, if I were to ask you, is 2015 the year you are sought after? Okay. If I were to ask you, is 2015 the year you get invited to speak at your APA chapter? Perhaps you'd say yes. Perhaps you'd say no. Perhaps you'd say, they might ask, but I wouldn't know what to say. Well, assuming that you have a good reputation and you probably will be invited, congratulations, you're in the right room. Let's roll up our sleeves and get you prepared to deliver a fabulous presentation for your APA chapter, or to your executive board, or to your team, or any other situation you find yourself in. So Jim, let's see if you can do this. We're putting you on the spot. If I were to ask you, in other words, you're not asking them, if you were, and the third part of the formula is what you're going to take up. So it's yes, no, or I wish I could know. That's the formula. Can you think of any of your presentations that would fit into?
Maybe in the tax forms presentation, I wish I could know how to complete this form. It's confusing. And that's what we're going to look at today, is 3 specific forms that we find as longtime payroll professionals very confusing.
Perfect. Good. Good. Sally, do you have one you could use that with?
Yes, there is a class on preparing for a successful year end.
Oh, perfect. If I were to ask you, are you going to have a successful year end? Perhaps you'd say yes. Perhaps no. Most likely it would be, I really want it to be, can you tell me how? Congratulations, you selected the right session that will guarantee this year end and every year end will be part of your favorite parts of the years, rather the one you dread. Could you do that?
Very good. Yes, thank you.
All right, Paul, has anybody sent in any opening lines for us to evaluate?
Yes, Larry White. He says this is an opening for garnishments. If you're not aware of the strict regulatory limits in conjunction with garnishments, you may be taking money from your employees illegally.
Oh, good. Now, let's look at, can you read that again slowly, Paul?
Yes. If you're not aware of the strict regulatory limits in conjunction with garnishments, you may be taking money from your employees illegally.
So perhaps you want to turn that around, and Larry is a great speaker. Perhaps you want to turn it around. And again, you don't know what's right or wrong. You practice both with some of your friends and see. Would it surprise you to know that you might be, and I'm going to get you to fill in the blank, Paul, because you got the script. Would it interest you to know you might unintentionally be
taking money from your employees illegally if you're not aware of the strict regulatory limits in conjunction with garnishments?
Stop with illegally. All right? Illegally. and then you pause, and Larry's good with the pauses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you make eye contact with the audience. Now you got their attention. And then the second part, Paul, is?
If you're not aware of the strict regulatory limits in conjunction with garnishments.
Yes. So what you're doing is taking the same sentence and turning it the halves around. Try it. Good. Do you like that, Jim?
Actually, I was going to take it and make it a little tighter,
All
Patricia,
right.
where instead of going, if you're not aware of the strict regulatory limits in conjunction with payroll, with garnishments, I think we might want to say, if you're not aware of the garnishment regulatory limits.
Okay, good. Good. Sally, any comments?
No, you've done a good job of turning that around, and Jim's very good at shortening that up.
And if there were only 2 parts of your presentation I want you to script, it would be the opening few lines and the concluding few lines, because it's only when it's in black and white can you literally take out, swivel the words around, take it out, or make it a better word or a stronger word, or put in the pauses. Good, Paul. Do we have any more?
Yes, this is from Bill. He says his opening line would be, "What a year for payroll. There's so much to talk about that we've divided this Legislative Outlook session into 2 parts. Look over your schedules. Maybe you'd like to join Mike O'Toole and Brian O'Loughlin in part 2. Let's jump into part 1, where we'll be covering these topics."
All right, good. And the opening few, yes, I like that. So say that again slowly. So what a year.
What a year for payroll. There's so much to talk about that we've divided this Legislative Outlook session into 2 parts. Look over your schedule. Maybe you'd like to join Mike O'Toole and Brian O'Loughlin in part 2. Let's jump into part 1, where we'll be covering these topics.
Okay, good. And Bill is a great presenter. So I like that. What I would probably suggest Bill does is, after the first line, add a second line about the emotion or the situation that this year is for APA members. What a year for payroll. Your job just got more complex. Or your job got... So, Jim, what would be a good second line for that? So, Paul, you want Paul to read it again?
No, actually, I've got it in front of me, Patricia. What a year for payroll. The never-ending regulatory and legislative changes have made our lives so complex. We're not covering all in this session. Be sure to go to part 2, where Mike O'Toole and Brian O'Loughlin will cover more of those issues we're facing.
Good, perfect. Now, can you see, and this really gives us a good promo on Speaker School, because it is very difficult to be creative in isolation. And in fact, do we have, I believe we have a poll. Are you planning to attend, Patricia, Speaker School for Congress speakers on Monday, May the 4th? I think that's a good promo to find out. You have yes, no, or I'm not sure, I haven't made my travel plans yet. Well, change that to yes and make your airline ticket.
Patricia, I've got a question about the Speaker School, and I'm excited. It's one of my favorite things of each year. But I was wondering, is there anything that we should do to prepare to come to Speaker School this year?
Well, usually what I start the session with is encouraging people to deliver their opening lines. So what I would do is, why don't you, because you have to do it, well, you don't have to, I highly recommend you do it anyway, is take our advice and script the opening and concluding lines. It can be 3 or 4 lines. Why don't you do that now while you're in your rehearsal part, and then bring those to Speaker School? also I recommend you bring specific questions. Think of them now. If we haven't covered them in this call, bring them to speaker school, because my opening usually before the coffee break is flexible and responding to you, and then Craig, some of his best content is helping people deliver stories, how to put them together and get ideas. So what you might want to do is think about some of the stories and examples you're going to use, and then see how Craig's advice and ideas might help. And we will probably do some mini coaching, so get ready. If you were the person lucky enough to be coached, what story would you want to present? So opening lines, stories, and specific questions, Jim. All right, so let's see. Yes, I wouldn't miss it. That's 90% yay. 5% no, I don't arrive in time. 5% I'm not sure, I haven't made my travel plans. So I would say in that case, it should be 95% if you haven't made your travel plans. And it is also my favorite part of Congress. I love all Congress, but that's a very special part. So Sally, any questions or comments left from you?
Well, Patricia, I am a Fripp VT user.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any suggestions on what I can focus on in Fripp VT between now and speaker school?
Well, yes, you can do better than some of the other people on this call and actually go in frequently. So I know we have people on our call who don't know about Fripp VT. So Paul, why don't we take this advantage to bring it up and just show people what Fripp VT is? It is my highly interactive, learn at your own speed, interactive training. It is almost like having me available 24/7. Well, if you're sick of Fripp after seeing her for 20 years, how about you can focus on the advice? Now, if you are not a VT member, why don't you sign up for a free trial? So, Paul, can you circle around the mouse so they can see exactly where their free trial is? Yes, start now for a free trial. Good, perfect. And then you sign up, that's it. Now let's just say you absolutely love it as much as Sally does. Well, then you can click on the Join Now. And if you're an APA member, you put APA in and you say 25%. Now, if you happen to be part of the Speakers Bureau, you just put your code is APASB, and you get an even better deal. So now, Paul, let's just go to the courses. So you can see, and if you turn your speakers down so we make sure no noise comes out, they just see where they're going.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So once you go, you would sign in or you get your trial and go to the training center, where we have 12 different courses. And APA members also can get 10 continuing education credits. But if you are a new presenter and you have never spoken at Congress before, which is a small amount, or if you're a little nervous, I would always suggest that perhaps what you want to do is look at the connecting to your audience, which gives you some ideas on how to make it all about the audience. Good. And this you can do in probably 30 minutes. I would also suggest you go to the course on openings, which is options of openings, the choices, which is course there, you can see it down there, Paul. That gives you plenty of options. And seeing Speaker School is going to focus on your stories. The storytelling one would also be a great one to get you live and in the mood to perfect your stories and then see if we can make them even better. So go take a trial, or if you've got an account, go sign in and use it. So, all right, Jim, are there any more questions that you have, or Paul? Paul, we have some questions from our audience. I see Steve has one. Isn't full screen on my monitor. Is that in general or now? So best is if you handle Steve offline, and it's important to go to the bottom of his screen and always look at the system requirements. Are there any, what time is Patricia's session on Monday? It is 9 o'clock till 3:30, and what we want you to do is come early to register and network. I certainly have the challenge that we all do, and Paul, if you can get out of VT and back to us. I always have the challenge that many of you do, getting the audience to quiet down, because everyone is so pleased to see each other. Now, are there any other questions I haven't addressed, Paul, from our audience?
No.
Good. So, Jim, any questions you have left over?
Well, I just wanted to remind everyone, Patricia, since our time is getting close to net ending, that if you haven't yet registered for the speaker school, be sure to send an email to either Teresa Lopez or Angela Benavides in the Speaker Administration Department. And yes, we've all received a number of emails from them, so we've got their emails telling them that we'll be at speaker school. And don't forget that when you can come to speaker school, you can also do all of your Congress registration at that point in time. You don't have to go to the normal Congress sign-in. We'll have all the registration for you right at the speaker school.
Okay, Sally, any questions or comments from you?
Well, we as speakers for APA have such wonderful information available to us. And we have Patricia Fripp, who offers her services, who offers to share her knowledge with us. So please take advantage of it. And for those who are flying into Congress and arriving Monday, I would imagine that Patricia would let them come into class a little late. Is that right, Patricia?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Understand, sometimes people are important, they have to go out for meetings, so you are always welcome at any time. Even if you can only come in for the last hour, come in. We guarantee we make every minute action-packed, content-rich, and audience-involving. And it's amazing how many people have been coming to every presentation school we've given APA for well over 10, 12 years. I've lost track how many years. And they still believe it is, I haven't heard this before. It's always good to be reminded and refreshed. And every year, Bill Dunn says, I should have started earlier. So this event has been to encourage you to start now, come prepared. So do you have a walk-away concluding line? Last word linger, Jim?
My last word is, if you haven't made your travel plans yet, do so now. There are 2 huge events at the MGM immediately before and immediately after the Congress. So make sure, if you haven't made your hotel reservations, the hotel block ends at the end of this week, to make sure you get into the hotel, because otherwise, who knows where in Las Vegas you'll be staying.
All right, good. Sally?
And in addition to making your travel plans and your hotel reservations immediately, if you haven't already done so, if you have not started preparing for your Congress presentations, start now. You cannot over-prepare. and practice makes progress.
Good. I'm glad you didn't say perfect. It makes progress. And this is Patricia Fripp reminding you, all learning needs repetition and reinforcement. We'll see you at Speaker School, and congratulations for being selected as a Congress presenter. And thank you, Paul, for your assistance. We'll see you in Las Vegas.